The open road can be dangerous, but sometimes the most terrifying things aren't accidents or bad weather. Some drivers have reported encounters so strange and disturbing that they still can't explain them years later. Have you ever driven down a lonely highway at night and felt like something was following you? Tonight, we explore 10 disturbing true haunted highway horror stories. Names and certain details have been changed for privacy, but every story is 100% real. Comment your location and current time, and subscribe to Black Fears for more true horror stories. I've been driving the same routes for 19 years. You learn things on a long haul that nobody in an office ever figures out. That the road has moods, that certain stretches feel different at 2 a.m. than they do at noon, that silence inside a cab is never actually silence. You learn to read the dark. So when I tell you what happened on Route 666 out of Gallup, I need you to understand I'm not the kind of man who scares easy. I'm not the kind of man who talks about things he can't explain. I spent 2 years after this night convincing myself I'd just been tired, that I'd nodded off at the wheel for a second, dreamed something, and woke up. I told myself that story until the morning I found the seatbelt buckled on the passenger side and remembered, with complete certainty, that I had never touched it. It was October. Not late October, not close to Halloween, nothing poetic like that. Just a plain Tuesday in the first week of the month. I'd left Albuquerque at 10 p.m. with a load of construction materials headed for Shiprock. That stretch of 666 through the Navajo Nation is not a road you take lightly at night. The locals have their own reasons for that. I had mine, and they were purely practical. No lighting, no shoulders worth trusting, wild animals that step out of the dark without any warning. You drive it slow and you drive it focused. I was maybe 40 minutes out of Gallup, around mile marker 47, when I saw him. He was standing on the right shoulder with his thumb out. That's it. That's the whole image. A man, medium height, dark jacket, thumb raised. Nothing unusual about the posture. Nothing alarming about the stance. But something in my chest did something it doesn't normally do. Like a single wrong note in a song you've heard 1,000 times. Your brain hasn't processed it yet, but your body already knows. I almost didn't stop. I want to be honest about that. 19 years on the road. Company policy says don't pick up hitchhikers. Common sense says don't pick up hitchhikers. And every story you've ever heard about what can happen says don't pick up hitchhikers. But it was 42 degrees out there. The nearest town was 17 miles behind us. And there was something about the way he was standing, very still, no shuffling, no waving, that made him seem less like a threat and more like someone who had simply run out of options. I pulled over. He climbed in before I'd even come to a complete stop. Not rushed, not grateful, just efficient. Like he'd been expecting me. He pulled the door shut and settled into the seat, and I noticed two things almost simultaneously. He smelled like rain, which made no sense because it hadn't rained in that part of New Mexico in weeks, and he was not wet. His jacket was dry. His hair was dry. He just smelled like rain, the way a memory smells like something. I asked him where he was headed. He said, Shiprock. Same as me. I told him that, and he nodded once and looked out the passenger window at the dark. No small talk. Fine with me. I'm not a man who needs conversation to fill a cab. I shifted back onto the road and we drove. For maybe 10 minutes we didn't speak. The road unrolled in the headlights and the desert sat flat and enormous on both sides, and the only sound was the engine and the tires. Normal. I was starting to relax. Starting to feel the small pride you feel when you do something decent and it turns out fine, when I noticed the cold. Not a chill. Not the kind of cold that comes from a heater not working hard enough. The kind of cold that comes from the inside of your skull and works outward. A cold that isn't about temperature at all. I looked over. He was looking at me. Not the way a passenger looks at a driver when they're about to say something. Not a glance. He was turned in the seat, fully facing me, watching me with an expression I still don't have a word for. Not threatening, not hungry, not sad, just attentive. The way you look at something you've been waiting a long time to see. I said, "You all right?" And he opened his mouth and started to say something, and I will spend the rest of my life wishing I could tell you what it was, because I didn't get to hear it. Not because he stopped, not because I interrupted him, because he wasn't there anymore. Mid-word. Mid-breath, Between one blink and the next, the passenger seat was empty. Not in the way a space is empty when someone gets up. Not that settled, person-shaped warmth the seat holds for a few seconds after someone leaves it. Empty the way a room is empty when no one has been in it for years. That quality of absence that has duration to it. Like the air itself had already forgotten him. The truck was still moving. I was still on the road. My hands were still on the wheel. I pulled over and I sat there with the hazards on for a long time, watching the orange light pulse against the empty desert, and I did not get out of the truck. I know what you're thinking. Why didn't I get out and look? Because I knew. I knew the way you sometimes know things before your brain agrees to know them. There was nothing to find out there. There was nothing out there at all. I checked the mirror. The road behind me was empty for as far as the hazard light reached. I checked the sleeper berth behind my seat. Empty. I turned on every light in the cab and I checked every inch of that space. Nothing. No bag. No jacket left behind. No receipt fallen from a pocket. Just the smell. That clean, impossible rain smell sitting in the cab like it owned the place. I drove to Shiprock. I made the delivery. I wrote nothing in my log except the time and the load weight and the mileage. What would I have written? Passenger vanished at mile 47. No physical trace. I'd have been pulled from the route and sent for a psych eval before I made it back to Albuquerque. And the thing is, I still tried to explain it. For a long time I tried very hard. Maybe he'd jumped out somehow. But the door hadn't opened. I would have heard it. Felt the pressure change in the cab. And the truck was moving. And even if somehow, impossibly, he'd opened that door without me hearing it and thrown himself out of a moving vehicle onto a desert highway at night, the door was still closed. Locked. The way it locks automatically when the cab is in gear. You can open it from the inside, but the mechanism makes noise. Always. I've driven that truck for 6 years and that lock has never opened silently. I thought about that for about 2 years. Tested it. Checked the passenger door lock mechanism 3 times with a mechanic who looked at me like I was losing it. It works perfectly. It is loud. There is no version of that door opening that I wouldn't have heard. Then there's the seatbelt. I told you about that already. Found it buckled the next morning when I went to do a pre-trip inspection. I want to be careful here because I know how this sounds. I know it sounds like the detail that a person adds when they've convinced themselves something happened. But I remember standing there with my clipboard and seeing the buckled seatbelt on the passenger side and feeling the ground sort of shift, not physically, but in the way that reality shifts when a thing that should be impossible is sitting right in front of you in the morning light with no explanation that makes sense. He buckled it. Or I buckled it without realizing, which I have never once done in 19 years of driving because I don't buckle a seat that isn't occupied. Because there's no reason to. Or something buckled it. I haven't driven that exact stretch of 666 at night since then.
Very routed.
Added time to my runs, taken different roads, eaten the extra miles. My dispatcher has asked me twice why my Shiprock runs take longer and both times I've told him the road conditions. He's accepted that. Roads out that way are unpredictable. What I haven't told him, what I haven't told most people, is that about 6 months after it happened, I was at a truck stop in Gallup and I got talking to an old Navajo man at the counter. Just talking. Weather, roads, the usual. And at some point I mentioned that I ran Route 666 sometimes, and he looked at me in a very specific way. Not alarmed. Knowing. Like I'd said a word in a language he spoke and I didn't. He asked me if anything had ever happened to me on that road. I looked at my coffee for a long time. Then I said, yeah, once something strange. And I described it. All of it. The hitchhiker, the rain smell, the disappearance, the cold, the seatbelt. I laid the whole thing out for this man I'd known for about 12 minutes. Because he was the first person I'd ever met who asked the question like he already knew there was an answer. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You're lucky he didn't finish the sentence. He paid for his coffee and left." I've turned that over in my head every single day since. You're lucky he didn't finish the sentence. I don't know what that means. I don't know what he was going to say to me in that cab at mile 47 on a Tuesday night in October. I don't know if knowing would have been worse than not knowing, or if not knowing is its own kind of damage that just takes longer to show up. What I know is this. 19 years on the road, and the thing that finally made me afraid of the dark wasn't a storm, wasn't a jackknife, wasn't a close call with an 18-wheeler in the fog. It was a man who smelled like rain in a desert, who disappeared mid-sentence, and an old man in a truck stop who told me I was lucky. I believe him. I just don't know why. Started as nothing. That's the part that gets me every time I try to explain it to someone. There was no dramatic first moment, no obvious sign that something was wrong. It started as nothing, and then it became something, and by the time I understood what I was looking at, it was already the third night and she was already turning her head. I was 17. I had my license for 4 months. My parents had no idea I was driving Highway 17 at midnight because my parents thought I was sleeping at a friend's house, which was technically true in the sense that I had been at her house, and I did sleep there, but not until after we'd driven up to Santa Cruz and back for no reason except that we were 17 and it was October and driving felt like freedom in a way that nothing else did yet. My friend fell asleep in the passenger seat somewhere around Scotts Valley on the way back. That left me alone with the road. If you've never driven Highway 17 through the Santa Cruz Mountains at night, the best I can do is tell you that it earns its reputation. It's not a straight road. It's not a forgiving road. It's a 2-lane climb through dense redwood forest with blind curves that arrive without warning and a drop-off on one side that you learn not to think about too hard. During the day, it's beautiful. At midnight in October, it is something else entirely. The trees press close on both sides and the headlights only reach so far, and beyond that reach there is a darkness that feels less like the absence of light and more like the presence of something else. I wasn't scared. I want to be clear about that because it matters for what comes next. I was alert, focused, both hands on the wheel, good driver. Not scared. The curve where I first saw her is about 11 miles into the mountain stretch. A left-hand bend that tightens as you take it, the kind that punishes anyone going even slightly too fast. I came around it doing about 38 miles per hour, which for that curve is responsible, and my headlights swung across the right shoulder and lit her up. A woman, standing on the very edge of the asphalt where the shoulder dissolves into the dark slope beyond. White dress, long, the kind that doesn't belong on a mountain highway at midnight. Arms at her sides, not moving. Not facing traffic, just standing there with her back to the road, looking out into the trees. I was past her in under 2 seconds. My brain processed her in pieces, white, still, wrong, and then she was behind me and the road was empty again and my heart was doing something it hadn't been doing a moment before. I thought about stopping. I thought about it hard for about a mile, and then I thought about the curve and the drop-off and the darkness and I kept driving. I told myself she was fine. I told myself she was a local, maybe a sleepwalker, maybe someone who'd pulled over and gotten out for reasons that were none of my business. I told myself a lot of things in that mile and none of them quite stuck. I didn't tell my friend. She was asleep. I didn't tell anyone when I got home. I wrote it off as one of those things. A strange image in the headlights, maybe misread, maybe just a trick of light and shadow and a tired brain on a dark road. Then I drove it again the next night. Not looking for her. I want to be clear about that too. My friend wanted to go again because she'd slept through the whole drive the first time and felt guilty about the gas money. And I said yes because I genuinely wasn't thinking about the woman in the white dress. That's what I told myself. That's almost true. Same curve. Same time, close to midnight, maybe a few minutes past. She was there. Same spot. Same dress. Same posture, arms at sides, back to the road, facing the trees. I slowed down this time. Not much, enough to look for an extra second, enough to be certain. She was real. Not a shadow, not a smear of mist catching the headlights. A person standing on a blind curve in the Santa Cruz Mountains at midnight in a long white dress. Completely still, looking at nothing. I drove the next 3 miles in silence. My friend was talking about something, school, a boy, something that had happened at lunch, and I was nodding and not hearing a single word because the only thing happening in my brain was a loop. She was there again, she was there again, she was there again. I pulled over at a turnout past the mountain stretch and I told my friend what I'd seen the night before. She stared at me. Then she said, "Why didn't you tell me?" I didn't have a good answer for that. We sat there for a while and talked about it the way 17-year-olds talk about things they don't understand. Circling it, joking at the edges, being braver with words than either of us felt. We came up with explanations. Locals hiking late, wrong turn, car trouble. Someone doing a photo shoot, a film student, a prank for a YouTube channel. Every explanation sounded reasonable until you placed it back on that specific curve in that specific darkness, and then it didn't sound reasonable at all. My friend wanted to go back and look. I said no. She pushed. I said no again, and something in my voice ended the conversation. I drove home a different route. That should have been where it ended. I know that. Every reasonable version of this story ends with me taking Highway 1 along the coast for the rest of the year, and eventually the memory softening into something I half convinced myself I imagined. That's what should have happened. Instead, on the third night, I drove it alone. I've thought about why so many times. Not to see if she'd be there. I already knew she'd be there. That was the thing I hadn't admitted to myself yet, but already knew in the way you know something when your body has accepted it before your mind catches up. She would be there. I think I went because I needed to know if she'd still be there when I was the only one who could see her. If she was something that happened to me specifically, or just something that happened on that road. I came around the curve doing 25. Crawling, almost. My headlights hit the shoulder. She was there. Same spot. Same dress. Same stillness. And I was going slow enough this time that I had 3, maybe 4 full seconds with her in my lights, and I used every one of them to look. She was real. She had hair, dark, long, hanging forward over her shoulders. She had bare feet on the asphalt, and I don't know why that detail hit me harder than anything else, the bare feet, but it did. She was slight. She looked like she might have been anywhere between 20 and 40. I couldn't see her face. I was almost past her when she turned her head. Not her body, just her head. Slowly, the way you turn to look at something you've known is there for a while. And the angle was wrong for her to be looking at traffic. She was looking back, not sideways, her chin coming over her left shoulder in a direction that should have been uncomfortable, turned just far enough. I couldn't see what she was looking at. I couldn't see her expression. By the time my brain sent the signal to my foot, the curve had taken her out of my mirrors, and there was nothing behind me but dark road and dark trees. I did not stop the car. I drove down the mountain doing 60 miles per hour, which on Highway 17 at night is not safe, and I did not care. My friend called me when I got back to the valley, and I didn't pick up. I sat in my car in a parking lot off Scotts Valley Drive with the engine running and every light on for about 40 minutes before I felt like I could drive the surface streets home. I never told my parents. I told my friend eventually, the head turn, the bare feet, all of it. She listened and didn't say the things I expected her to say. She just asked one question. She asked if the woman had been looking at me or at something behind me. I've been sitting with that question for years now, because at the time I didn't have an answer and I said so, and we left it there. But the longer I've thought about it, the more I've landed on something I can't shake loose. She wasn't looking at me. The angle was wrong for that. Her head turned back and to the left, which from her position on the shoulder, facing the trees, would mean she was looking back along the road. Back the way I'd come. At something behind me, in the dark, that I hadn't seen. Something I had driven past without knowing. Something that was, apparently, still there. I'm in my 20s now. I've driven that highway dozens of times since, always in daylight, always for reasons I could justify. I've come around that curve doing responsible speeds with good visibility, and there is never anyone there. Just asphalt and the tree line and the drop-off and the daylight making it all look ordinary. I don't drive it at night anymore. Not because I'm afraid of seeing her again. I think I made my peace with her, or whatever she was, a long time ago. She was just standing there. She wasn't doing anything. She turned her head. Those are facts, not threats. What I haven't made peace with is my friend's question. Because if she wasn't looking at me, if she was looking back at something else on that road, something I passed without seeing, then there's a version of those 3 nights where the woman in the white dress wasn't the thing I should have been afraid of. And I drove past the thing I should have been afraid of 3 times in the dark and never once saw it. That's what keeps me on the coastal route. That's what keeps me in the daylight. There is a specific kind of alone that only exists on a highway at 2 a.m. when you are the only vehicle in either direction and the road ahead of you is so straight and so flat that your headlights seem to curve upward into the sky before they run out. Not lonely. Not peaceful. Something in between that has no clean name. I'd worked night maintenance on I-80 through Wyoming for 3 years by the time it happened, and that feeling was as familiar to me as my own kitchen. It was part of the job. You made your peace with it or you found different work. I'd made my peace with it. The work itself is simple in the way that only very physical, very repetitive things are simple. Simple enough that your hands learn it and your body learns it and your mind is mostly free to wander while the machine does what machines do. I was running the lane striping truck that night. You've seen these on the highway during the day. Big slow vehicles with a paint applicator on the rear, rolling at about 5 miles per hour, laying down those bright yellow center lines and white edge lines that tell you where you are on the road. At 2 a.m. on a Tuesday in early November on a stretch of I-80 between Rawlins and Laramie where there is genuinely nothing on either side for 30 miles in any direction, you are doing this work alone. Dispatch is a radio call away. Your supervisor checks in every 2 hours. Otherwise it is just you and the machine and the paint and the dark. I'd started at the Rawlins end of my assigned segment at 11 p.m. Standard 4-mile stretch of center line, degraded from summer traffic, needed a fresh coat before the winter closures came. I'd done this exact stretch twice before in my 3 years on the crew. I knew it. I knew where the pavement got rough around mile 219. I knew about the slight rightward drift in the road around 221 that you had to compensate for. I knew the segment end marker at 223. Familiar territory. Routine night. For the first 2 miles, everything was exactly what it was supposed to be. Then I crossed mile marker 221 and my headlights showed me something that stopped the routine so completely that it took me almost a full 10 seconds to understand what I was seeing. The road ahead of me was already painted. Not old paint. Not the faded, degraded stripe I'd been hired to refresh. Fresh paint, bright, wet edge bright, the kind of yellow that almost glows under work lights, the kind that means the paint went down in the last hour. Clean, crisp edges. Perfect width. Running ahead of me down the center of the road as far as my lights reached. I stopped the truck. I sat there with the engine idling and the work lights running and I looked at that paint for a long time. My brain did what brains do. It started reaching for explanations immediately, almost frantically, the way you reach for the light switch in a dark room before you've consciously decided to. Maybe dispatch had sent a second crew from the Laramie end and they'd overlapped. Maybe there'd been a scheduling error and someone had already done this segment earlier in the shift. Maybe I had the wrong coordinates and I drifted into an adjacent segment that had already been completed by another crew earlier in the week. I got on the radio and asked dispatch. Dispatch told me I was the only crew on that segment tonight. Had been since 11 p.m. No other vehicles authorized on that stretch, no maintenance activity logged for that section in the past 72 hours. I looked at the paint. I told dispatch what I was seeing. There was a pause that lasted longer than radio pauses usually last. Then they told me to hold my position and they'd check the logs. I held my position. 5 minutes. 10. I got out of the truck and I walked to the edge of the fresh stripe and I crouched down and I looked at it the way you look at something when you're hoping proximity will produce an explanation that distance didn't. The paint was real. It was fresh. I could smell it. That sharp chemical smell that clings to your clothes on a work night, and it was wet enough that when I held my hand 2 inches above the surface, I could feel the faint tackiness of the air above it. Done within the hour, maybe within the last 30 minutes. There were no tire tracks alongside it, no equipment marks on the shoulder, no indication that a second striping truck had been through, and a striping truck at 5 miles per hour on a highway leaves evidence. It leaves marks. It has outriggers and it has wheel patterns and it disturbs the gravel on the shoulder. There was nothing, just the paint, sitting on the road the way paint sits when it has always been there, except it hadn't been there 2 miles back, and it hadn't been there 3 hours ago when I'd driven this segment in my personal truck before the shift to check conditions. Dispatch came back and told me the logs were clean. Nothing. No crew, no authorization, no record. I told them I was going to drive ahead and check how far the fresh paint ran. They told me to be careful. The way someone says be careful when they don't have anything more useful to say. I drove forward at walking pace with my work lights on full, watching the stripe. It ran perfectly. No wobble, no inconsistency, no sign of a human hand getting tired or a machine drifting. Just a clean, steady line rolling under my truck and disappearing in the mirror behind me. I watched the mile markers. 221 and a half. 222. 222 and a half. Kept going. And that is when something in my chest shifted from confused to something I don't have a better word for than wrong. Not frightened, not yet. Just wrong, the way a sound is wrong when the pitch is slightly off from what you expected. Because this was my segment. I knew this road. I had driven it 3 hours before the shift, and the stripe was faded and needed work, and there was no fresh paint anywhere on it. And now there was fresh paint for at least 1.5 miles, and it was going perfectly, and there was no explanation that held weight. I got to mile 223. My segment end marker. The fresh paint stopped exactly there. Clean termination, no fade, no trailing off. Just a precise end point, as if whoever or whatever had done it had known exactly where my assigned segment finished. I stopped the truck at the marker and I sat there for a long time. Here's what I haven't told you yet. The part 1 kept out of my incident report because I didn't know how to put it in language that a form has space for. About 200 meters before the segment end, my work lights had caught something on the shoulder. A mark in the gravel. I'd slowed down and looked at it through the side window as I passed. Not a tire track, not an equipment mark. A single straight line pressed into the gravel, perpendicular to the road, like something had been dragged or placed. Maybe 4 feet long. Clean ends. I don't know what made it. I've thought about it for 2 years and I have no answer that satisfies me. The incident report I filed said equipment malfunction, possible contamination of paint readings, and asked for a segment reinspection before sign-off. That's what it said. My supervisor signed off on it with a note saying the segment showed full fresh coverage and no further work was required and to move on to the next section. That was the end of it, officially. What wasn't in the report? I didn't sleep when I got home that morning. I lay in bed and I went through every possibility one more time, slowly, trying to find the one I'd missed. Second crew error. Scheduling overlap. Section misidentification. Rogue private contractor. Some bizarre coincidence of timing and geography. None of them survived contact with the specific details. The wet, fresh smell. The clean termination exactly at my segment boundary. The absence of equipment marks on the shoulder. The fact that dispatch had nothing in the logs. The fact that the work was perfect. More perfect, if I'm honest, than my own machine would have done it. More consistent, better edge definition. Exactly the right paint depth. Whatever painted that road knew what it was doing. I transferred to the day shift 4 months later. Told my supervisor it was a family thing, change in my kids' school schedule, needed to be home at night. He didn't question it. Most guys on the night crew eventually find a reason to come back to days. The night has a way of making that happen. The thing I come back to, the thing I can't put down no matter how long I carry it, is the timing. I was 2 miles behind that paint. At 5 miles per hour, 2 miles is 24 minutes. Meaning whatever laid that stripe finished 24 minutes before I got there, at the most. Probably less. The tackiness of the air above fresh paint fades fast in Wyoming wind. 24 minutes. In either direction, 30 miles of flat open road with no cover and no turnoffs and nothing but scrub and dark. I should have seen it. There are no service roads on that segment. No underpasses, no ranch entries. No breaks in the fence line. Nowhere to go. Nowhere to come from. Whatever did that work rolled across 4 miles of open Wyoming highway at 2 a.m. and painted a perfect stripe and left no trace of itself on the road or the shoulder or the radio logs. And it knew exactly where my segment ended. That's the part one think about when the nights get long. Not the paint, not the smell, not the gravel mark. The precision of it. The fact that it knew. The dashboard camera was my mother's idea. She'd read something online about road safety for solo female drivers. One of those articles that lists 12 things you should do before a long trip, written by someone who has clearly never actually driven alone across a desert, and she called me 2 days before I left and made me promise. Get a dash cam. One with a rear-facing lens that covers the interior. She wanted to know that if anything happened to me on that drive, there would be footage. Evidence. Something that could tell a story if I couldn't. I bought it the next morning. Mounted it on the windshield, angled so the front lens pointed through the glass at the road ahead and the rear lens pointed back into the cabin. Tested it in the parking lot of the electronics store, watched the live feed on my phone, adjusted the angle until I could see the full back seat and both rear windows and most of the rear footwell. Clear image. Good coverage. My mother, when I sent her a screenshot of the feed, responded with a string of approving emojis, and then immediately sent a separate message telling me to call her when I got to Vegas.
I'm deaf.
Have been since I was 6. A fever that my parents still refer to in the careful tone adults use for things that could have been worse. I wear hearing aids in both ears during most of my waking hours, and they are good enough that I function in a hearing world without most people realizing. But on long drives I take them out. The road vibration aggravates the fit, and after 4 or 5 hours they cause a pressure headache behind my ears that isn't worth tolerating when silence is an option. So on long drives I drive in complete silence. No music, no podcasts, no sound at all. Just the visual information of the road and, when I remembered to check it, the live feed from the dashcam mounted in front of me. US 93 through Nevada is not a road that asks anything complicated of you. It is flat and straight and empty in a way that becomes almost meditative after the first hour. The desert spreading in every direction to a horizon that barely changes. The sky enormous and pale and cloudless. The road ahead so long and so straight that you can see your own destination vanishing point and know you won't reach it for another hour at least. I'd driven it once before, 2 years earlier, and remembered nothing remarkable about it. Just a road. Just desert. I left the junction at Ely at 11 p.m. I'd planned the timing deliberately. Cooler temperatures at night, less glare, lighter traffic. My route to Las Vegas was about 4 hours on 93 and I'd made peace with the darkness. I had the dashcam feed open on my phone in the cup holder, glancing at it occasionally the way you glance at a side mirror, just as part of the rhythm of checking your environment. Road, mirrors, feed, road, mirrors, feed. For the first hour, the feed showed me exactly what it was supposed to show. The back seat, empty. The rear windows, dark Nevada night. The footwell, my bag wedged against the back of the passenger seat. A folded jacket on the seat behind me. Nothing unusual. Nothing wrong. At some point between Ely and the turnoff for McGill, I didn't check the exact time. I was watching the road. I glanced at the phone. There was someone in the back seat. I looked at the phone. I looked in the rearview mirror. I looked back at the phone. The rearview mirror showed me the same back seat I'd been driving with for an hour. My jacket on the seat. My bag on the floor. The rear windows with dark desert moving past them. Empty. The phone showed me something else. A figure sitting behind the passenger seat. Upright. Still. The image quality was good enough that I could see detail, and what I could see was a person-shaped darkness that had solidity to it, depth, the way a real physical thing in a camera frame has depth that a shadow or artifact doesn't. It wasn't a glitch. It wasn't a smear on the lens. It was sitting in my back seat the way a passenger sits, occupying space, displacing it, present.
I pulled over.
I want to describe accurately what the next 3 minutes were like, because I think people expect panic, and what I felt was something colder and more precise than panic. When you are deaf and you drive alone, you develop a specific relationship with visual information. You trust it more, you process it faster, you have less tolerance for ambiguity in what you see because you don't have sound to cross-reference. What I saw on that screen was not ambiguous. My eyes were working. The camera was working. The image was clear. I pulled over, put the car in park, turned on every interior light, and I turned around and looked at the back seat directly. My jacket, my bag, empty seat, empty footwell, the desert outside the rear windows, lit faint by the ambient glow of the interior lights. I picked up my phone and looked at the live feed. The figure was still there, sitting in the same position, behind the passenger seat, upright, still, facing forward the way a passenger faces forward. The interior lights that I just turned on were visible in the feed. I could see them casting the correct light on the headrests, on the rear windows, on my jacket. The lighting in the live feed matched the lighting in the actual car. Everything matched except the one thing that didn't. I took a screenshot. I have it still. I've shown it to 3 people and all 3 of them went quiet in the specific way people go quiet when they're trying to find something to say that is honest and also kind. I got out of the car. I opened the rear passenger door and I stood there in the dark on the shoulder of US 93 with the desert silent in every direction, and I looked at the back seat in person and the back seat was empty, and I looked at my phone and the feed showed me the figure still sitting there undisturbed while the rear door was open and the interior lights were on and I was standing close enough to touch it. Nothing there. On the screen, something there. I got back in the car. I am going to be honest about why. Not because I'd resolved anything, not because I'd found an explanation, but because the alternative was standing on the shoulder of a Nevada highway alone at midnight with no explanation and no phone signal and no sound in my ears, and that felt worse than getting back in the car. Sometimes the choice isn't between safe and unsafe. Sometimes it's between two different kinds of exposure and you just pick the one that has forward motion attached to it. I drove and I did not look at the phone for the next 20 minutes, and then I looked at it because not looking had become its own kind of unbearable. The figure was still there. Same position. Same stillness. Sitting in my back seat on the live feed of a camera that was filming an empty seat in a car I was alone in on a straight dark road in the Nevada desert with no other vehicles in either direction. I need to tell you about the moment that moved it from frightening to something I still don't have a word for. About 40 minutes south of where I'd pulled over, I glanced at the feed again. The figure was there. And then, I watched this happen in real time on the screen in the cup holder. I did not imagine it. I did not misread it. It turned its head. Not toward me. Not toward the window. Turned its head down. The way someone turns their head down when they're looking at something in their lap. Slowly, with the kind of deliberateness that takes intention. I did not pull over this time. I do not know if that was brave or stupid. I kept my eyes on the road and I drove and I did not look at the phone again for 47 minutes by the clock on the dashboard. 47 minutes of straight Nevada highway with my hands on the wheel, and the interior dark and the desert moving past me and something in my back seat on a screen I refused to look at. When I finally looked, the back seat on the feed was empty. My jacket, my bag, the rear windows, nothing else. I have gone over the technical explanations more times than I can count. Lens artifact from the interior reflection. A folded piece of the jacket catching the camera in a way that read as a figure. Some interference pattern from the car's electronics. I've described the footage to 3 camera technicians and none of them dismissed the technical explanations, but none of them fully committed to them either. One of them, the third one, watched the screenshot for a long time and said the depth mapping was wrong for an artifact. Artifacts sit on the surface of an image, he said. They don't have the spatial layering that the figure in the frame had. He said it looked like something that was actually there. I haven't taken out my hearing aids on a long drive since. I don't know if that changes anything. I don't know if hearing the car, hearing the road, hearing whatever there is to hear in a vehicle moving through desert at night would have told me something or nothing. But there is a specific kind of silence that comes with no hearing aids in and a dark road ahead and a live feed running in your cup holder. And I know now that I am not equipped to sit inside that silence anymore. My mother asks sometimes if the dashcam made me feel safer. I tell her yes, because she is my mother and she bought it so that if something happened there would be footage. There is footage. That is not the comfort she intended it to be. 31 years on the job, and I never once wrote an incident report I didn't believe. That's not a small thing in this line of work. You see enough, you respond to enough calls in enough dark places at enough strange hours, and the temptation to round things off, to write the version that fits the form, that sits cleanly in a file that nobody is going to question, that temptation becomes familiar. I know officers who gave in to it. Not dishonest men, not bad officers. Just men who decided at some point that the official record and the true record didn't always need to be the same document. I was not that kind of officer. 31 years. Every report accurate to what I observed, what I measured, what I could support with evidence. That was the standard I held myself to. Past tense now. I'm retired, have been for 2 years, and I can tell you this because the report I filed that night is already in a drawer somewhere and nobody is going to pull it and compare it to what I'm about to say. What I filed and what happened are not the same document. It was a Tuesday in late October. I was running a standard patrol on I-70 through the flat stretch of Morton County. The kind of shift that produces nothing except mileage and a mild ache in the lower back from the seat. Kansas at 11 p.m. in late October is not a place where things happen. The land is too flat and too dark and too indifferent. I'd been on that road for 6 years at that point, and the calls I responded to were medical emergencies, drunk drivers, the occasional animal strike. Routine. Manageable. Real. The welfare call came in at 11:42 p.m. Motorist reported seeing a child standing on the railing of the overpass at mile marker 189. The Garrison Road overpass, a standard 2-lane bridge over the interstate, the kind that exists every 15 miles through that part of Kansas and looks exactly like every other one. No identifying features. No reason for anyone to stop there or stand there or be there at midnight on a Tuesday in late October. A child on a railing. I was 6 minutes out. I told dispatch I was responding and I pushed the speed up and I ran the lights because that is the call you do not take slowly. Not a possible jumper, not an adult, a child, and on a railing, which means exposed, which means one wrong movement between the report and my arrival could change everything about what I found when I got there. For minutes. I got there in 4 minutes because the road was empty and I drove it like the road was empty. I came up the access ramp onto Garrison Road and my headlights hit the overpass and I saw nothing. No child. No figure of any kind. The railing, a standard concrete barrier maybe 3.5 feet high, was empty along its entire length. The road surface was empty. Both shoulders were empty. I pulled up to the center of the overpass and stopped the cruiser and got out and I walked the full length of that bridge in both directions, flashlight running, looking at the railing and the road surface and the drop below on both sides. Nothing. I radioed dispatch and said I was on scene. No subject located. Requesting the reporting motorist's contact information to follow up on the description. Dispatch said the motorist had called from a moving vehicle, southbound. No callback number logged. Standard anonymous welfare call. I stood on that overpass for another few minutes. Wind was coming across the flatland from the northwest, the kind of wind that Kansas produces in October like it's making a point, and it was cold enough that I put my hands in my jacket pockets and I looked down at the interstate below me where 2 vehicles passed in the time I was standing there. One semi going west, one pickup going east, and I thought about what a motorist sees when their headlights hit a bridge railing at highway speed. How a shadow falls. How a sign, a post, a piece of debris can read as a shape at the wrong moment in the wrong light. I wrote it up as unfounded. No subject located. Possible visual misidentification by reporting motorist under low-light conditions. Standard language. Filed it the same night. Here is what I didn't write. When I got back to the cruiser, this was maybe 8 minutes after I'd arrived. Maybe 9. I sat down and I reached for the radio and I happened to look at the dashcam monitor. My department had installed in-car cameras on all patrol vehicles the year before, forward-facing, running continuously during active shifts. The monitor sits on the dash to the right of the steering wheel and it shows the live feed and has a 30-second buffer that you can review if you need to check what the camera caught in the moments before you stopped. I reviewed the buffer. The camera had been running when I came up the access ramp and hit the overpass with my headlights. 30 seconds of footage that covered my approach, my arrival, the first sweep of the headlights across the railing. The railing in the footage was not empty. I watched it 4 times sitting in that cruiser on Garrison Road with the wind moving across the bridge and the interstate running below me and nobody else within visible distance in any direction. There was something on the railing. Not clearly. Not the way a child stands on a railing, not upright, not balanced, not recognizable as a human shape in any posture I've seen in 31 years of responding to calls involving human beings in distress. It was on the railing the way something perches. Low. Folded in on itself. The headlights caught it for maybe 2 seconds before I pulled up and stopped and the angle changed and the railing came into the range of my spotlight and it was gone. 2 seconds of footage. I have asked myself many times since then what I was looking at. A bird possible, except the size was wrong, and birds don't typically hold a position on a concrete barrier in a 30-mile-an-hour crosswind. A piece of debris caught on the railing possible, except it wasn't there when I walked the bridge and I walked the entire length and I am a thorough man. A trick of the headlight angle possible, except the shape had depth and definition that headlight artifacts don't produce. Artifacts are flat. Whatever the camera caught was not flat. It didn't move like a child. That's the sentence I keep coming back to, the one I've turned over more times than I can count in 2 years of retirement with too much quiet and too much time to think. A child on a railing moves like a child, with the particular instability of a small body in an exposed position, the microcorrections of balance, the way a child's proportions distribute weight differently than an adult's. What the camera caught was not moving like a child. It was still in a way that felt less like a person holding a position and more like a thing that had never needed to balance at all. 2 seconds. Then it was gone and the railing was empty and I walked the bridge and found nothing. I pulled the footage to a personal drive before I filed the incident report. I have looked at it many times. I have shown it to one person. A former colleague, retired now like me, 28 years on the job, a man whose judgment I trust more than almost anyone I've ever worked with. I showed it to him 6 months after it happened, at his kitchen table on my laptop, and I didn't tell him what I thought I was seeing. I let him watch it cold. He watched it 3 times. Then he looked at me. He asked me where this was. I told him. He nodded slowly. Then he said something I've been sitting with ever since. He said that when he was a young officer before my time, there had been an incident at that same overpass. A child, he said. A real one. He didn't know the details, it was before his time too. Something he'd heard from an older officer years ago. He said he'd always assumed it was just one of those stories that circulates in departments, the kind that gets attached to a location because locations need stories. He looked at the screen again. Then he said he wasn't sure anymore. I drove home that night on I-70 and I passed mile marker 189 doing 80 miles per hour, which for a retired man in a personal vehicle is inadvisable, and I did not look at the Garrison Road overpass as I went under it. I looked at the road ahead. I kept looking at the road ahead until the bridge was well behind me and the flatland had swallowed it up and there was nothing in my mirrors but dark. The footage is still on the drive. I have not deleted it because deleting it feels like a decision I'm not entitled to make alone. But I haven't shown it to anyone else either, because showing it means explaining it and I have no explanation that I would put my name to. 31 years. Every report accurate to what I observed, what I measured, what I could support with evidence. I saw something on that railing that my headlights caught for 2 seconds before it was gone. Cannot tell you what it was. I can tell you it was not a child. And I can tell you that the motorist who called it in, whoever they were, driving south on I-70 on a Tuesday night in late October, calling from a moving vehicle with no callback number, saw something on that railing too. They just described it in the only language they had. The thing about ranching is that you stop being surprised by the dark a long time before anything in the dark earns that indifference. I grew up on that land. Learned to drive on those roads before I was legally old enough to drive them. Spent more pre-dawn hours behind a wheel on Highway 212 through the Montana flatlands than I have spent sleeping in a bed in the last 20 years, and I mean that in the most literal way I know how to say it. Calving season starts at 4 a.m. Feeding runs start at 4 a.m. Vet calls, fence checks, waterline problems in January when the temperature drops to something that makes the word cold feel inadequate. All of it starts before the sun has any opinion about the matter. The dark out there is not romantic. It is not atmospheric. It is just the condition under which work gets done. So when I tell you I am not a man who frightens easily in the dark, I need you to understand that this is not a boast. It is a professional qualification. It is context for what I'm about to describe, because without it you might think I panicked or misread something, or let the isolation get to me in a way that a more experienced man wouldn't have. I didn't panic. I didn't misread anything. What happened, happened. It was the 3rd week of November. Pre-dawn, for 40 a.m. Temperature sitting at 11 degrees with a wind chill that took it lower. I was running Highway 212 east toward the feed supplier in Broadus. A drive I'd done 400 times if I'd done it once. 63 miles of flat 2-lane through rangeland that doesn't change much between where I started and where I was going. Dark in every direction. Stars sharp the way they get only when the air is cold enough to hurt. No other vehicles. The truck was warm and running well and I had coffee in the cup holder and the road was dry, which in November on 212 is not something you take for granted. 40 minutes out, somewhere around the stretch between Lame Deer and Busby, where the road runs straight for about 8 miles with nothing on either side but fence line and frozen grass. Something hit the roof of my truck. Not a tap. Not the sound a branch makes when it clips the cab, or the flat smack of a large bird strike on the windshield. Both of which I've experienced and both of which have a specific character that your body recognizes and files correctly. This was weight. Concentrated, deliberate weight landing on the roof in a single impact, directly above the cab, hard enough that I felt it in the seat through the frame of the vehicle. My first thought was a deer. Not because it made sense, deer don't fall from the sky onto moving trucks on flat open highway, but because on 212 in November your threat vocabulary is written in deer, and your brain reaches for the familiar before it reaches for anything else. I checked the windshield. No impact. I checked the mirrors. Nothing on the road behind me. No shape bouncing away in the red wash of the tail lights. Whatever hit the roof was still on the roof. I could feel it. That is the part one have had trouble explaining to the 2 people I've told this to, because it sounds like the kind of thing a person says when they're embellishing, when they're trying to make a story bigger than it is. But I am not an embellishing man, and I am telling you what I physically felt. Weight on the roof of the cab, above my head, not rolling, not sliding, not moving with the momentum of the truck the way an object would move if it had landed inert. Settled. Positioned. The way something sits when it has placed itself deliberately and has no intention of moving. I drove for about 30 seconds with that weight above me and the road ahead empty and the cold outside and the heater running in my hands. And I am not ashamed to tell you this. My hands had gone tight on the wheel in the way hands go tight when the body has decided something before the mind has caught up.
I pulled over.
I sat in the truck with the engine running and the hazards on. Orange light pulsing across the frozen grass on both shoulders. And I waited. 30 seconds. A minute. The weight above me did not shift. Did not move toward the edge of the roof. Did not produce any sound that came through the headliner. No scratching, no movement, nothing. Just present. Just there. I got out. This is the decision I've replayed the most. Not because I think it was wrong. I'm a practical man. I needed to know what was on my truck. I had 60 miles of dark road ahead of me and I wasn't going to drive them with an unknown weight on my cab. But the moment I opened the door and stepped out into that 11-degree air and the wind hit me and the silence of that particular stretch of 212 at 4 a.m. wrapped around everything, I understood in my body before I understood in my mind that whatever was up there, I did not want to see it. I looked anyway. The roof of the cab was empty. I walked around the truck completely. Looked at the road surface around all four sides. Looked at the shoulders in both directions as far as the hazard lights reached. Nothing. No animal, no debris, no object of any kind that could account for what I'd felt. The bed of the truck. Empty except for the tie-downs and the spare I keep back there. The undercarriage, what I could see of it with the flashlight. Nothing lodged, nothing dragging. I stood there in the cold with the flashlight and the orange pulse of the hazards and the wind, and I looked at the roof of the cab. Too dense. I want to be precise about this because precision is the only thing I have to offer, and I know how this sounds without it. On the roof of the cab, roughly centered, side by side with about 14 inches of space between them, too dense pressed into the sheet metal. Not crumple damage, not the spreading, irregular deformation of an impact from above. Pressed. The sheet metal was deformed downward in two roughly oval shapes, each one maybe 8 inches at the longest dimension, with a depth at the center of each that I measured later with a straight edge at just over an inch. Pressed inward. From outside, I put my hands in the shapes, not thinking about it, just the automatic gesture of a man who works with his hands and measures the world in physical terms. My hands are large. Ranch work does that. The dents were larger than my hands. Noticeably larger, the way a shape is larger than your hand when the thing that made it had more hand than you do. The edges of each dent were clean. No scratching, no surface scoring, no paint transfer, no indication of a tool or an implement. Just pressure applied from outside the vehicle, pressing the metal in two distinct points separated by 14 inches, with a force sufficient to deform truck roof steel by an inch at center depth. I stood in 11 degrees on a dark Montana highway at 4:40 in the morning, and I looked at those dents for a long time. Then I got back in the truck and I drove to Broadus and I loaded the feed and I drove home, and I didn't say anything to anybody for 3 days. Not because I was afraid of being disbelieved, though I was, but because I needed those 3 days to go through every explanation I could construct and test each one against what I knew. A pronghorn on an overpass structure coming down on the cab. There are no overpass structures on that stretch of 212. A large bird, an eagle or a great horned owl, striking the roof with its talons. Possible for the weight, not possible for the dent geometry. Eagles don't leave oval impressions an inch deep in truck steel. A piece of equipment from another vehicle, a highway sign panel, something launched from a truck bed by road vibration. Nothing behind me, nothing on the road, no debris anywhere near the vehicle. I checked the road surface with the flashlight for 20 feet in each direction when I was standing there, and there was nothing. What leaves 2 parallel inward dents in truck roof steel, spaced 14 inches apart, with clean oval edges and no surface scoring, from outside the vehicle while the vehicle is moving at highway speed. I've asked that question to a body shop mechanic who's worked on ranch vehicles for 30 years. He looked at the roof, looked at the dent geometry, looked at me and said he couldn't tell me what made them. He said the pressure pattern was wrong for any impact he'd seen. He said it looked like something had pressed down, not struck down. His word. Pressed. The dents are still there. I didn't have the roof repaired. I told myself it wasn't worth the cost, which is partially true. But the more honest reason is that repairing them felt like erasing the only physical record of something I cannot explain, and I am a man who does not throw away evidence just because he doesn't understand it yet. The roof of that truck sits in my yard right now. Every morning when I head out for the pre-dawn run, I put my coffee in the cup holder and I start the engine and I look at the headliner above my seat and I think about what was on the other side of it for those 30 seconds on Highway 212 in the dark. What it was. How long it had been on that road before I came along. Whether it was looking for a ride. Or whether I was simply the thing it landed on while it was looking for something else. 12 years of nursing will do something specific to the way you think about fear. Not remove it. That's the thing people assume, that working in emergency medicine long enough makes you immune to the things that frighten ordinary people, that you develop some professional callus over the part of you that responds to dread. That's not what happens. What happens is more precise than that. You learn to categorize. You learn to sort incoming information into two columns. Things that require immediate action, and things that can wait. Fear gets filed the same way everything else does. You don't stop feeling it. You just stop letting it drive. I ran trauma for 8 years in Albuquerque before I burned out and got my CDL and started driving long haul. People always react to that combination like it's strange. Nurse to trucker, what happened? Are you okay? And the honest answer is that I'm better. The road is quiet in a way that a trauma bay never is. The decisions are simpler. You go from here to there. You carry what you're given. You deliver it intact. There is a cleanness to it that I needed after 8 years of the other thing. I'd been driving for 4 years when it happened. I knew I-40 through New Mexico the way I'd known the layout of my trauma bay. Automatically, in my bones, without having to think about where anything was. The stretch between Albuquerque and the Arizona border is not a road that asks much of you. It is wide and well-maintained and mostly straight, and the traffic at night is light enough that you can find a rhythm and stay in it for hours. I ran it at least twice a month. It was comfortable. That matters for what comes next. Because what happened didn't happen on unfamiliar ground. It happened on a road I knew. The CB crackled at 2:17 a.m. I know the time because I looked at the dash clock when I heard it, the same reflex that makes you check the time when something unexpected pulls you out of the rhythm of a long drive. The radio had been quiet for almost 90 minutes, standard for that stretch at that hour, and when it came to life I assumed it was another driver, a westbound rig I'd passed a few miles back maybe, checking conditions or just breaking the silence the way drivers do. It was not another driver. The voice was a child's. Not a recording. Not a broadcast. A live voice. The slight unevenness of a real child's breathing between words. That particular quality of unfiltered directness that children have when they're telling you something they consider important. Clear enough that I could hear the consonants, the vowel shapes, the rhythm of someone choosing their words with care. It said, "Turn left in 4 miles at the exit for County Road 6. I stared at the radio. In 12 years of nursing and 4 years of trucking, I have responded to a lot of things that required rapid assessment. Child's voice on a CB radio at 2 a.m. on an empty stretch of I-40 was not a scenario I had a protocol for. I sat with it for about 10 seconds, which on a highway at speed is a long time to sit with something, and then I picked up the handset and I said, "Who is this? What's your 20? Are you okay?" Static. Then the voice again. "For miles. County Road 6. Turn left." Not responding to my questions. Not acknowledging that I'd spoken. Just the directions delivered in the same careful tone. The tone of a child reading from something or reciting something memorized. Patient. Unhurried. Like it had all the time it needed and was not concerned about whether I was following. I am a practical woman. I have held people's lives in my hands in a trauma bay and made decisions in under 30 seconds that I had to live with afterward regardless of how they turned out. I am not given to impulse or to being led by things I don't understand. But I am also, and this is the thing about nursing that doesn't go away when you leave it, I am wired to respond when something sounds like it needs response. A child's voice at 2 a.m. in the middle of a desert, giving directions. The part of me that triaged for 8 years said, possible lost child, possible emergency, possible minor in distress operating someone else's radio. That part of me won the argument. I took the exit for County Road 6. The road dropped off the interstate and turned to two-lane asphalt immediately, the kind of road that exists in rural New Mexico without apology. No lighting, no markings, no indication of where it goes or how long it continues. My headlights lit up maybe 100 feet of road ahead before the dark took over. Scrubland on both sides. No structures visible. No lights in any direction. The CB crackled again. Stay on County Road 6 for 7 miles. Then right on the Cielo Rojo Road. I kept driving because I was already committed and because the voice was still there and because every mile I drove I was scanning the shoulder for a child, for a vehicle, for any physical evidence of what I was responding to. Nothing. The road was empty and the scrub was dark and the only sound was my engine and the occasional burst of static from the radio between instructions. 7 miles in, there was a road on the right. It was not marked. No sign, no post, no reflector. Just a break in the scrubland where the dirt had been cleared enough for a vehicle to pass. I would not have seen it as a road at all if I hadn't been told to look for it. I slowed down and pointed my spotlight at it, and it went back into the dark at an angle and disappeared. The voice said, "Cielo Rojo, you're almost there." I stopped the truck. Not because I'd made a decision. Because something in me, not fear exactly, not yet, but the thing that comes before fear, the somatic intelligence that nursing develops when book intelligence isn't fast enough. Something in me applied the brakes before my conscious mind caught up with the reason. I sat there with the engine running and the spotlight pointing at the unmarked dirt road, and I did what I do when I need to think clearly. I went through the information. A child's voice on a CB radio at 2 a.m. Specific directions to a specific location. An unmarked road in an unlit section of rural New Mexico. No child visible. No vehicle visible. No physical evidence of any distress or emergency. Directions delivered without response to my questions, without acknowledgement of my presence, as if they had been prepared in advance and were being read out regardless of who was listening. And then the detail that I had been moving past too quickly to examine properly. The voice had not told me to stop so it could get help. It had not told me there was an emergency. It had not said anything that a lost child, a child in distress, a child operating a radio would say to an adult they were trying to reach. It had only ever given me directions. Turn here. Go this far. You're almost there. Not a distress call. A set of instructions. I picked up the handset one more time and I said very clearly, "I'm not coming any further. If you need help, tell me where you are and I will call it in. I will wait here for 5 minutes." Silence. Then the voice said, "You're almost there." Same tone. Same patience. Same careful pronunciation. Like my words had passed through whatever was transmitting them and left no mark at all. I turned the truck around on County Road 6, which in a full rig at night is not a simple maneuver, and I drove back to I-40 and I got on the highway going west and I put 70 miles between me and that exit before I pulled into a truck stop and sat for an hour with bad coffee and the CB switched off. I called my dispatcher in the morning and told him I'd had a radio malfunction on the overnight run. He logged it and told me to have the unit checked at the next depot. I had it checked. The mechanic found nothing wrong with it, unit functioning correctly, no anomalies, no explanation for what I'd described. I filed that and moved on. That's the nursing reflex. You debrief, you file it, you move on. But here is what I did before I moved on because I am a thorough person and I needed to know. I looked up Cielo Rojo, the Spanish. It means red sky. As a place name, it doesn't appear in any database I could access. No USPS record, no county road designation, no historical map reference for that area of Torrance County. The road I was directed to, the unnamed dirt track off County Road 6, does not exist in any navigation system I've checked. I've checked for. I asked an old Albuquerque colleague about the area. She grew up in Torrance County. When I described the location, the exit, the distance, the direction, she went quiet in a specific way that I recognized from 8 years in emergency medicine. The quiet of someone deciding how much to say. She said her grandmother used to talk about that part of the county. About a place people went to out there a long time ago that nobody talked about much anymore. She said her grandmother called it by a name in Spanish. I asked her what the name meant in English. She said, "The place the road goes but people don't come back from." I have not taken a CB call from an unidentified voice since that night. I run I-40 regularly. I know the exit for County Road 6 by the mileage now, and when I pass it I keep my eyes on the road ahead and my hand off the handset. 12 years of nursing taught me to respond to a child in distress. 4 years of driving taught me that not everything that sounds like distress is asking for help. Some things are just asking you to come. We were 20 minutes into the mountains when the radio found us. Not when we found the radio. I want to be precise about that from the start because the distinction matters and because I've told this story enough times now to know that people collapse it into something simpler than it was. We didn't find a frequency. We didn't scan into something strange. The radio in that car had been off since we left Denver. Off, not on a silent station, not on static, off, the display dark, the power button unlit. We'd been playing music through a phone plugged into the AUX jack for the first hour of the drive, and then the phone died and nobody had a charger that fit, and we'd been driving in silence for 20 minutes through the mountain dark when the radio turned itself on. That's where it starts. 4 of us in a 2008 Honda Civic that belonged to the one who was driving. She'd had it since high school, 140,000 miles on it, the kind of car that runs on loyalty and stubbornness rather than any mechanical right to still be operating. We were coming back from a weekend in Denver, headed home to Fort Collins, and the decision to take Highway 285 south through the mountains instead of the interstate had been made at the last minute for no reason more significant than someone saying the drive is prettier and the rest of us agreeing without really thinking about it. Late Sunday night. The road through that part of Colorado at that hour is not busy. We'd passed maybe 4 other vehicles in 20 minutes. The radio display lit up. No station number appeared. No frequency. Just the display glowing that pale greenish white it glows when it's active, and then sound coming through the speakers, not music, not static, not the fragment of a broadcast fading in and out the way signals do in mountain terrain. A voice. Clear and close, and even the way a voice sounds when it is in the same room as you, the same car as you, the same small dark space as you. It said. The girl in the passenger seat just looked at her phone. She'd picked up her phone 10 seconds before. We all saw it. Checking the time or the battery, some automatic gesture, and then setting it back in her lap. Nobody said anything for about 4 seconds. Then the girl in the passenger seat said, "What?" Not to us. To the radio. The voice continued. It didn't respond to her. It didn't acknowledge that she'd spoken. It just continued in the same flat, even tone, the tone of someone reading aloud from a document, and it said, "The driver has both hands on the wheel. The one behind the driver has his feet on the seat. The one behind the passenger is looking at the radio." I was behind the passenger seat. I was looking at the radio. I want to tell you that there was screaming, that we reacted the way people react in films when something impossible happens. Loudly, dramatically, with a clarity of terror that communicates itself cleanly. That is not what happened. What happened was a silence that lasted probably 8 seconds and felt much longer. The 4 of us in a small car on a dark mountain road with a voice coming out of an unlit radio describing us. And the silence was the sound of 4 people's minds all hitting the same wall at the same time. The driver reached for the power button and turned the radio off. The display went dark. We drove for maybe 30 seconds in silence. The display lit up again. The voice said. She turned it off and then it came back on. She's gripping the wheel harder now. I could see her knuckles from the back seat in the dim light from the dashboard. The one behind the driver, he'd put his feet down when his name wasn't said but the description of him was given, that instinctive self-correction, as if being described accurately by something that shouldn't be able to describe you creates the urge to be less describable. He reached forward and tried the volume knob. Turned it all the way down. The display stayed lit. The voice kept coming through the speakers at the same volume. Indifferent to the knob. Said he tried to turn the sound down. It didn't work. The one in the back right is recording on his phone. I wasn't. I want to be clear about that. I was not recording. I had thought about it and not done it, and the voice had narrated the thought or narrated an action that hadn't happened but that I had considered, and I don't know which of those possibilities is worse. The driver pulled over. This was on a stretch of 285 where pulling over means a narrow gravel shoulder and a drop-off on the right side that you don't look at too hard, and she put the car in park and she reached down and pulled the AUX cable out of the phone jack, and then she reached under the dashboard and did something I wouldn't have known to do. She found the fuse for the radio and she pulled it. I know this because she told us what she was doing while she was doing it, in a voice that was steady in the specific way that voices are steady when steadiness is a decision being made in real time. The display went dark. The voice stopped mid-sentence. I don't know what the end of that sentence was. The fuse came out and the display went dark and the voice stopped, and what was left was the four of us in a parked car on the shoulder of Highway 285 in the Colorado mountains at 11-something at night, with the engine running and the headlights on and the road ahead empty, and the silence of a car when the radio has been physically disconnected from its power source. It was not a comfortable silence. The girl in the passenger seat asked, very quietly, what it was saying when she pulled the fuse. The driver said she didn't know. She'd been focused on the fuse. I know. I heard it. I have not told them what it was saying because I've turned it over enough times to believe that some information is not useful, that there is a category of thing you hear that does not become less heavy by being shared, it just becomes distributed weight that more people have to carry. But I'll say it here because this is the whole story and the whole story deserves the whole truth. It was describing what would happen next. Not as a threat. Not with any emotional register at all. Same flat reading aloud tone it had used to describe the phone check, the hands on the wheel, the feet on the seat. It was describing the next few minutes in the same documentary voice it had used for the past several minutes of present tense narration. And what it was describing was specific and sequential and had the quality of something already determined, the way a voice describes something that has already happened rather than something that might. The fuse ended that sentence. We drove to Fort Collins on I-70 the long way around. Nobody said much. The radio stayed dark the whole drive, fuse out, display unlit, which meant we drove in silence for an hour and 40 minutes through the mountain dark, and nobody suggested putting the fuse back in. We checked the car the next morning in daylight. The fuse was a standard radio fuse, the correct size for that vehicle, nothing unusual about it. We put it back in. The radio came on normally, found the preset stations, displayed the frequency, behaved like a radio. We have no recording of what happened. The one behind the driver did eventually pull out his phone and start filming, and the footage shows the glowing display and the four of us in the car, and you can hear something coming through the speakers, but the audio is too compressed and too distorted by the car noise to make out words. He's shown it to a few people. Nobody has been able to tell him what the voice is saying. I've thought about the technical explanations. A cross signal from a broadcast. A software glitch in the head unit. Something in the mountain terrain producing radio interference of a very specific and very coherent kind. I've thought about them seriously, not dismissively, because I'm not a person who reaches for the inexplicable before exhausting the explicable. But here's the thing about those explanations, the thing I keep coming back to after 4 years of carrying this. Cross signals don't know your name. Interference doesn't track your hand movements in real time and describe them in grammatically correct sentences 5 seconds after they happen. A software glitch doesn't describe what the next few minutes will look like in the tone of something that has already seen them. We were 20 minutes into the mountains. The radio had been off. Something turned it on because it had something to say. The only thing I'm grateful for, the only clean thing in this whole account, is that we didn't let it finish. I don't know what the last sentence would have been. I don't know if ignorance is protection or just delay. What I know is that the four of us drove home in silence with the fuse in the passenger seat cup holder. And when we got to Fort Collins, we sat in the driveway for a while without getting out. And nobody said what we were all thinking, which was that the voice had been accurate about everything it described up to the point where the fuse cut it off. Everything. Which means the last thing it was saying, the thing about the next few minutes, the thing in the tone of something already determined. That accuracy doesn't stop at the point where we stopped listening. It just means we don't know the ending. I have driven in 4 countries on 3 continents, and I will tell you plainly that the M6 at 3 a.m. is its own category of alone. Not because it is particularly dangerous. Not because the road itself is difficult. It is a motorway, 3 lanes, well-maintained, the kind of infrastructure that the English build with a quiet thoroughness that you only appreciate when you have driven roads that don't have it. The M6 is a good road. But there is something about that corridor through the Midlands in the dead hours of a weeknight that produces a specific quality of isolation that I have not found anywhere else I have driven. The service stations sit far apart. The overhead gantries flash their amber instructions to nobody. The road stretches north in long, gentle curves, and the darkness on either side is the darkness of a country that has turned its back on the night and gone inside. And you are the only one who has not. I had been in England for 6 years by then. Brought my license across, converted it, spent 2 years on urban deliveries before I got onto the long-haul runs. The M6 North was my regular corridor. Birmingham up to Preston, sometimes further, 2 or 3 times a week depending on the load schedule. I knew that road the way you know a commute. The junction numbers, the stretches where the surface changes and the cab vibrates differently. The place around junction 16 where there is always, regardless of weather or season or time of night, a single crow sitting on the same gantry post. Small things. A driver's knowledge. This was a Wednesday in February. Load out of a distribution center near Coventry, delivery to a cold storage facility outside Preston, standard run. Nothing about it that morning when I signed the paperwork suggested it would be the run I would think about for the rest of my life. I passed junction 13 at 2:48 a.m. Clean road behind me. I know this because I checked the mirrors at the junction the way I always check mirrors at junctions. Habit, training, the automatic audit of your surroundings that becomes involuntary after enough years behind a wheel. Both lanes behind me empty. The southbound carriageway across the central reservation carrying nothing visible in either direction. The slip road clear. A clean road in every direction. By junction 14 I had settled back into the rhythm of the run. Speed steady, mirrors checked every 8 seconds on rotation. The radio on low playing something I wasn't really listening to. Normal. The kind of driving that is more maintenance than effort, where your body runs the machine and your mind does something quieter in the background. I checked the left mirror. There was a figure on the hard shoulder. Not close, maybe 200 meters back, caught at the edge of what the mirror could show me, right at the limit of my tail light reach. Standing, facing forward. The posture of someone who wanted to be seen. Not hunched, not moving, not waving with urgency. Just standing there on the hard shoulder of the M6 northbound at 3 a.m. facing the direction of traffic with the attitude of someone who had been there a while and had no doubt they would be noticed eventually. My first thought was a breakdown. Driver out of a vehicle, maybe the vehicle had come to rest further up the shoulder and I hadn't passed it. This happens on the motorway at night more often than people realize. Someone breaks down, gets out, stands somewhere visible. The protocol is to call it in to Highways England and keep moving because stopping on a live motorway hard shoulder at speed is more dangerous than the situation you're trying to respond to. I reached for the radio handset to call it in. I checked the left mirror again. The figure was closer. This is the part where I have to ask you to stay with me because I know what it sounds like and I also know what I saw. I had been doing 85 kilometers per hour. The figure had been 200 meters behind me. Between one mirror check and the next 8 seconds, my standard rotation, the distance between us had more than halved. The figure was now perhaps 80 meters back. Still on the hard shoulder. Still facing forward. Still not running. Not moving in any way that I could see from the mirror. Just closer. I pressed the accelerator. Not a panic response. I want to be clear about my state of mind because it matters. I was not panicking. I was a professional driver with years of night miles behind me and I was making a practical decision, which was that whatever was happening with that figure, more distance between us was preferable to less. I brought the speed up to 100 kilometers per hour and I kept my eyes on the road ahead and I counted to 15 and I checked the left mirror. The figure was 50 meters back. I am going to tell you what I felt in that moment as precisely as I can because imprecision would be a dishonesty I'm not willing to offer. What I felt was not fear in the way that fear usually presents itself to me. I have been afraid in my life. Real afraid, circumstances in my country of origin before I left that gave fear its proper context and scale. What I felt looking at that mirror was something adjacent to fear but structurally different. It was the feeling of a rule being broken. Not a human rule, not a law or a convention. A rule at a more fundamental level. The rule that says the physical world behaves consistently, that distance and speed have a fixed relationship, that a stationary object on a shoulder does not close on a vehicle doing 100 kilometers per hour through the mechanism of simply being closer each time you look. That rule was being broken. I pushed the speed to 115. I did not check the mirror for 90 seconds. I have a clock in the cab and I watched it. 90 seconds at 115 kilometers per hour. I watched the road ahead and I did not look at the mirror and I counted the seconds and when 90 of them had passed I moved my eyes to the mirror with the specific deliberateness of someone who is choosing to look rather than being compelled to. 30 meters. The figure was 30 meters behind me. The hard shoulder behind it was empty in both directions as far as the amber motorway lighting reached. No vehicle. No movement. Just the figure 30 meters back. standing the way it had been standing since the first moment I saw it. Upright, forward-facing, with a patience that had stopped feeling like stillness and started feeling like intention. I want to tell you what it looked like in detail, and I find that I cannot. Not because the memory is unclear, it is very clear, pressed into me the way certain moments press themselves in, but because when I try to assemble the details I find that the figure does not assemble into a coherent description. It had the shape of a person. It occupied the space a person occupies on a shoulder at night. Beyond that, the details do not settle. The lighting should have been enough for more than I got. I've thought about that many times. It is 30 meters behind me and it has no detail I can give you. I called it in to Highways England at that point. Not because I thought they could help, but because I needed to hear a voice that was not in my cab. I needed the radio connection to another human being. I needed the act of reporting something to somebody to restore the ordinary structure of the world. The operator took my location and my description. Stationary figure, hard shoulder, possible breakdown situation, and told me a patrol was available and would investigate and thanked me for calling. She did not ask me why I was doing 115 kilometers per hour. I checked the dashcam at the next service station. I pulled in at Stafford Services and I sat in the lorry park with the engine running and I pulled up the footage on the dashcam unit. The forward camera showed the motorway, clean and empty ahead of me, exactly as it had been. I switched to the rear-facing channel. The rear camera showed the motorway behind me, the hard shoulder, the motorway lighting, the lane markings. In every frame from the moment I passed junction 13, the hard shoulder behind me was empty. No figure. Not at 200 meters, not at 80 meters, not at 50 meters, not at 30 meters. The footage showed a clean and empty hard shoulder the entire length of my rear camera's reach. I sat with that for a long time. There are two possibilities and I have lived with both of them. The first is that the camera missed it, angle, resolution, the limits of a rear-facing dashcam unit at night. Possible. Cameras miss things that human eyes catch, particularly in peripheral conditions on a dark road. The second possibility I will not write out in full because writing it out in full means committing to something that I have not yet fully committed to. I reached Preston at 5:20 a.m. and made the delivery and signed the paperwork and drank terrible coffee from a machine in the loading bay and drove back south on the M6 in the early gray light with the road filling up around me and the night gone and the ordinary world reassembling itself in the way it always does when the dark runs out of hours. I checked the mirror at junction 13 going south. Clean road. Morning traffic beginning.
O transitvon.
A silver estate car. Normal things. I have run that corridor many times since. I check the mirrors every 8 seconds on rotation the way I was trained. I am always counting the distance. I have not told this to my dispatcher. I have not told it to my family. I am telling it to you because you are not someone whose face I will have to watch while they decide what to do with it. The M6 is a good road. Something on it one February night decided to follow me. What I cannot make peace with, what I wake up in the middle of the night and lie in the dark turning over, is that it never arrived. It was getting closer and closer, and then I was at the service station, and when I looked at the footage there was nothing there. Which means I don't know where it stopped. Which means I don't know if it did. There is a grief that stops being emotional after a certain point and becomes geological. It doesn't hurt the way it hurt in the beginning. It doesn't arrive in waves anymore. It doesn't ambush you in grocery stores or at traffic lights the way it did in the first year. It becomes something structural instead. Something that is simply part of the composition of you, the way a fault line is part of the composition of rock. Not visible on the surface, not actively rupturing, just there, running through everything, defining the shape of the whole without announcing itself. That is where I was 11 years out. 11 years since the night my daughter called me at 9 p.m. to say she was leaving her friend's place in Montpelier and would be home in 40 minutes. And I said drive safe, and she said I always do, and I heard her voice say those 4 words and I didn't know they were the last 4 words I would ever hear from her. She was 19. The road was Highway 9 through the Green Mountains. The investigation said black ice. The drop on the eastern side of that stretch is significant, and the barrier at that particular point had been flagged for reinforcement twice in the 2 years before the accident and reinforced once, insufficiently afterward. 11 years. I had not driven Highway 9 since the night I drove it toward the scene with my hazards on and my wife in the passenger seat not making any sound at all. That drive, the 23 minutes between the phone call from the state trooper and the moment we arrived at the barrier, is a journey I have taken apart and put back together in my mind more times than I could count, examining every second of it, as if the road itself had been trying to tell me something that I'd been too late to understand. I drove it again in October, 11 years and 1 month after she died. I don't know how to explain the decision except to say that it wasn't a decision in the way that most decisions are weighed, considered, made. It was more like a door that had been closed for 11 years, and one morning I woke up and understood that not opening it was taking more from me than opening it would. My therapist, who I've seen for 9 of the 11 years, had suggested it several times with the careful indirection that good therapists use. I deflected each time. Then one October morning I got in the car and I drove to Vermont. I left at 4 a.m. so I would reach the mountain stretch at dawn. I needed light. I needed to see the road as a road and not as the darkness I had always imagined when I thought about what she saw in the last seconds. The drive up from Massachusetts was 4 hours of interstate, unremarkable, the kind of driving where the miles pass without registering because your mind is doing something else entirely. I was not afraid. I was not numb. I was something in between that had no clean name, present and moving toward something, and uncertain in a way that felt important rather than paralyzing. I turned onto Highway 9 just before first light. The road through the Green Mountains in October is something that a person from away might call beautiful, and they would not be wrong, but beauty is not a category that applies cleanly to a place where your child died. What I noticed instead was the specificity of it. The way the road curves before it climbs. The angle of the guardrails on the western stretches. The particular texture of the asphalt that my headlights turned amber in the pre-dawn dark. I had imagined this road for 11 years from a single terrible approach at night, and the reality of it in the quiet October morning was both exactly what I expected and entirely different. I drove the whole stretch without stopping. On the far side, where the road descends toward Brattleboro and widens out and the trees open up and the light was coming properly by then, I found a pull-off that I didn't remember from any previous drive, and I pulled in because I needed a minute. Just a minute. To sit with where I was and what I'd done and let the geological things shift a little in the way geological things shift. Slowly, significantly, without drama. I sat there for about 20 minutes with the engine off and the windows down and the cold October air moving through the car. Then I got out and I walked around to the front of the car because I needed to move, and that is when I saw it. On the windshield. Driver's side, low, tucked under the wiper blade the way a parking ticket is tucked, or a flyer the way something is placed when someone wants to make sure it stays. Piece of paper folded once. I stood there for a moment before I touched it. The pull-off was empty. I had not passed another vehicle on Highway 9 in the 40 minutes I'd been on the road. The parking area was a gravel rectangle cut into the tree line, large enough for 3 or 4 vehicles. No structures visible, no indication of recent use. The gravel around my car showed my tire tracks and nothing else. No footprints in the frost-tipped grass at the edges of the gravel. Nothing to indicate that anyone had been here before me, or had come while I was sitting with the windows down and the engine off. I unfolded the paper. It was a drawing. Done in crayon, the thick waxy kind that comes in the large boxes made for small hands, on a piece of white paper that had been folded carefully, deliberately, the crease sharp and even. The drawing showed 3 figures, 2 tall ones and 1 small one between them, the small one holding a hand on each side in the way children draw themselves held. The figures had the particular economy of a child's representation: circular heads, straight bodies, arms extending from shoulders at an angle. Simple. Immediate. Below the figures, written in the careful, oversized letters of a child learning to print, was a word. Her name. My daughter's name. Not a common name. Not a name that appears on keychains in gift shops or on pre-printed birthday banners. A name her mother and I had chosen from a book of Celtic names before she was born. A name we had never met on another person in 19 years of her life or 11 years after it. 6 letters, specific, belonging to her. Written in crayon on a folded piece of paper tucked under the wiper blade of my car in an empty pull-off on the far side of Highway 9 in October, 11 years after she died. I stood in that parking area for a very long time. I am a practical man. I managed a hardware business for 22 years. I coached youth soccer for a decade. I am not a man given to mysticism or to finding significance in coincidence or to constructing meaning from things that have ordinary explanations. I have tried, in 11 years of grief, to remain a man who deals in the real and the concrete because dealing in the real and the concrete was the only way I knew how to keep going. I tried to find the ordinary explanation. A child had been in that pull-off recently. Family road trip, rest stop, the paper fallen from the car and blown under my wiper. Possible, except the frost on the surrounding grass was undisturbed and the gravel showed no other tire tracks and the paper was dry on a morning when the dew was heavy on every surface except the paper itself. A coincidence of name, someone else's child, someone else's drawing, a different name that I read as hers because grief does that, because the brain fills in what it is primed to find. I have looked at that paper many times since and the name on it is the name on it. 6 letters. Hers. There is no reading that makes it something else. Someone who knew me, knew about the anniversary of the drive, followed me up there, placed it there as what? A gesture of comfort? A cruelty? I know of no person who would do either of those things. I have no explanation. What I have is the drawing. I keep it in the top drawer of the desk in my study, still folded on its original crease. I have not shown it to my wife because my wife has built her own geological structure around 11 years of loss, and I will not disturb its foundations without understanding what I'm disturbing them with. I have not been back to Highway 9. Not because I'm afraid to go back. The drive itself gave me something I'd needed for a long time, a way of meeting the road as a road rather than as a fixed point of horror. I'll go back. I think I'll go back in the spring. What I haven't resolved, what I carry alongside the drawing in the same way I carry everything else, quietly, structurally, as part of the composition of who I am now, is the question of the 3 figures in the drawing. 2 tall ones and 1 small one in the middle, the small one holding a hand on each side. My daughter was an only child. She had no younger siblings. There was no small one, but that is how she drew herself always, from the time she could hold a crayon. I know this because we have a box in the attic. 30-odd drawings from her early years, the way you keep things when you don't know yet that someday keeping them will be all you have. In every drawing she put herself in, she drew herself the smallest figure. Even when she was the only figure, even when there was no one on either side of her. She drew herself small, with arms out, as if she were always waiting to hold someone's hand. The figure in the middle of that drawing is holding both hands. I don't know who is on either side of her. I choose to believe one of them is me. 10 roads, 10 nights, 10 stories that nobody believed until they happened to them. Whatever is out there on those highways, it was there before us and it will be there long after we stop driving. This is Black Fears. If this found you in the dark, subscribe and stay close. We have more stories where these came from, much darker ones.